My lunch is here.
I'm having a granola bar because this is my breakfast, and a cake ball because I'm an adult.
Who among us has not just had a cake ball or a cookie or something? Like, if you've ever had a donut for breakfast, same difference.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's very American of us, though.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
very, very US-ian of us to be like, dessert is breakfast, fuck off.
Fuck off.
Welcome to Bonus Experience.
Dessert is breakfast.
Fest.
Fuck off. Cold open.
That felt like a good place to just be like, time to start. Welcome to Bonus Experience. This is a podcast with a deeper look at the play experience and the finer details of running and writing games. And we are two queer people speaking with authority about games. And we're going to swear, so you can just die mad about it.
Yeah.
This is season 6. We're recording this early. This is going to be released at some point during our 6th season. I don't know when. I'm sure this will sound very weird when this drops in the middle of a normal ass sequence. But,
Right.
Whatever.
Let's just try not to do anything to date ourselves, talk about current politics.
Right, yeah. I mean, that's going to happen anyway. Hello, everyone. We're pre-recording a lot of stuff for season 6, so if it's dated, shut up. I am Monica, your host. I'm here all the time. You can't get rid of me. I'm a developer and designer for Onyx Path. I do some other freelance stuff on the side. I'm working on my own original fiction now. That's a cool development. Welcome to 2023. I'm happy to be here. And I'm in the imaginary studio with our friend, Dee. Reintroduce yourself to these group of people who know who you are already.
Hi, I'm Dee. I'm only here sometimes, but you still can't get rid of me. I am a writer, developer, game designer, and I'm working on my own game this year. Mm-hmm. 2 of them, in fact.
Very exciting.
Yeah, so new developments for me as well. 2023, the year of getting shit done.
Yeah. A coworker asked me if I had a New Year's resolution, and I was like, it's really more like a New Year's to-do list.
Yeah.
It's not I have a bunch of things I needed to get done in January, and they're not like resolutions, they're like stuff I have to do. Mm-hmm. We are here to talk about resource management mechanics.
Yes.
I wish I had actually written some stuff down, but I didn't, so we're doing this live.
Well, I can start by talking about what we mean by resource management.
Yeah, great. Define that for us. That's usually the good place to begin, by defining what the fuck we're talking about.
Right. So resources in a game specifically are the things that you spend or care about. For example, Exalted would be your essence modes.
Right.
Would be your resource. And you spend them on your powers, or you spend them to get special things, and then they come back in a particular way. And every game's mechanics, how they come back, is always different. And managing how you spend your resources, how they come back, when you get them, when you spend them, that's what resource management is.
Yeah. I'm going to add to that there are a lot of board games that use this as sort of its central mechanic, right?
Yes, absolutely.
There are some board games that are entirely about resource management. And this is a thing that can be very crunchy.
Right.
And very bean county if you are not careful. And sometimes if the bean counting is done well, it can actually be pretty fun. But this is a place where, in my opinion, simpler is better.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of a board game that is nothing but resource management, but is also pretty simple, is Settlers of Catan. Oh,
yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of strategy involved, but it's all it is resource management.
That's it. That's the whole thing.
That's the whole game.
Well, actually, that's not... There is a little bit of risk management.
There's a little bit.
We'll talk about risk management being... Let's try to get a very basic definition down as being sort of the, managing the risk. I can't think of a better substitute word here for that. Of, will this thing succeed, right? Malifaux is a very great example because you have your hand of cards, which is a resource, and then you have the cheating mechanic where you take a card from your hand and replace it with the flip you made.
Mhm.
So the risk there is deciding when to use one of your limited cards to replace the result.
Right.
And then, like, I think the best resource management mechanics work something like that, where there is an element of both. It's not just the spreadsheet of how to spend stuff, it's also the question of, like, when do I do it? And Catan has that in that you put your little guy, or you control the certain areas on the board, and then that corresponds to the number on the die.
Right.
And so if you play the long game for, like, 1 and 12,
Yes.
you're gonna get big payouts whenever those two things happen, but it's a 2d6 roll, so you really want to be in that 7 to 9 spot. Play a PBTA game.
Right. Yeah, so I might define risk as your decision having a consequence.
Mm-hmm.
And that consequence isn't always like terrible or catastrophic. Sometimes that consequence is, now I can't use that thing ever again. Right. It's a limited resource. And this limited resource is something that I can't get back. You know, sometimes games put limited resources in front of you, so that part of the resource management is, when do I use this specific instance of my resource when I won't be able to use it again? And making that decision. You know, a game that had a resource management element to it that was pretty good, if I do say so myself, was actually D&D 4th edition, where your resource was your special powers. You had an at-will, the resource you could use at any time. You had an encounter power, which you could use during encounters.
Yeah, each one once a fight, basically.
Once a fight. And then you had daily powers, which you could only use once between long rests.
Yeah.
And deciding when to use, like, you know, you want to use your encounter power every encounter, because if you don't, then you've wasted the opportunity to use that resource.
Right.
But your daily, trying to decide, is this encounter today the encounter that I want to use it on, or should I save it for a bigger encounter later, is some question of, how do I spend this resource? And that is a risky resource. That is your limited resource of how do you spend it.
Yeah, and when you do things like the daily power, you do run into the design problem of presenting players with the conundrum of when is the right time to use it.
Yes.
And then accidentally creating the situation in which you're like, well, whoops, I didn't use it, and that would have been the right time because I held on to it. And so you have to be careful. So we're gonna also talk about, like, the pitfalls of doing this, and that's one of them. Like,
yes.
If you make your resources too scarce or too narratively restricted, then you run into the risk that people won't use it, and that's not the desired outcome.
Yeah. You know, I'm noodling using a 2 resource management system with one of the games that I'm working on. The way I want to do the resource mechanics of this is, it will have some, you know, a little bit of time resource of when can I use this power, but with a ability to reset your cooldown using a different resource. And so you can essentially try to manage, do I use the resource that I use to activate powers, some powers, not all powers, but some powers, big powers need this to be activated. Do I use it to cool those down? Do I use it for another big power?
Right.
It's not completely limited. It's not so limited that I've only got one that I can use, but it is limited in that getting it back isn't necessarily, it doesn't just refresh every, you know, so often. You've got to go do something meaningful to get it to refresh.
You know what else is actually a really spectacular example of a resource management game? Any of the Belonging Outside Belonging games.
No, I haven't played any of those.
You know, I haven't played them either, but I read Sleepaway.
Okay.
And I went, oh, this is really fucking good.
Okay.
Like, so the tokens are basically, story game people are going to get so mad at me for this, but it's literally just a very well-designed resource management mechanic. It is, guys. Calm down. And, like, the thing is that the narrative props that up so beautifully, right? Like, you have a very limited amount of resources, which are your tokens. It's very hard to do your strong moves, which is important. And you have to put yourself sort of in a bad or scary situation at your own choice to get them back, right? And so you have this very, very well-tuned push and pull that directly serves the story you're trying to tell. I learned from playing Bluebeard's Bride 2 years ago that I really like scary storytelling games a lot. I love a ghost story. I love a scary story, and
Yeah, I do too.
tabletop RPGs like that lets you do that. Like, just tell a ghost story is just for me.
Oh yeah.
So I bought Sleepaway, and I was very impressed with it. Really, really cool. And then I was also like, oh, the resource management in this spectacular, because it's the thing propping up the thing that makes it scary. And there's no randomization either, which is one of the things that's nice about it, if you're into that. And so I also think that adding a level of randomization on top of your resource management mechanic is making it even harder.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I really, all of that just to say that I really dig a mechanic in any game where to get your resource back, you have to do something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that thing that you have to do needs to be meaningful and actionable because, I think about, you got to do something to get your resource back. And the World of Darkness and Chronicles of Darkness games have a resource management mechanic that is, sometimes in my opinion, the thing you have to do to get your resource back is a little nebulous and a little weirdly disjointed from the game itself.
Yeah. I think probably one of my biggest problems with the whole World of Darkness library, and I'm including Classic, 20th, Chronicles, all of that in the same bubble, is that they have every supernatural type has such really fucking cool powers. This would be a very Exalted fan of me, but and then it makes it very hard to use them. And I understand that like the point isn't to have the cool powers, but like if you're gonna put these really cool, dynamic, neat abilities in your game, don't restrict the players from using them.
Well, it wouldn't
or just limit the number of them that they can have, right?
Right. Like, it wouldn't be so restrictive if there was a clear way to get your resource back. But the way you get your resource back is very nebulous and kind of up to your storyteller. All the storyteller games are very like, I'm going to go feed, I'm a vampire, I'm going to go suck on somebody's neck to get blood back.
Right.
And that should just be something you can say you do, but you've got to do a scene and then it's random how much blood you get, or if you want to, how long or how many people. And it's difficult because it's not extremely clear. And then, you have more of this resource weirdness when you get into the games like Mage or Werewolf or Changeling, where you've got to do more esoteric things than just sucking on somebody's neck.
Yeah. The Vampire has a pretty clear, like, Vampire is maybe the best example.
Yeah.
Even V5, because, like, the thing you have to do to get your blood back is act like a vampire.
Right.
Straightforward, right? Like, that's, I'm going to call that one pretty good, right?
Yeah,
like,
it's pretty decent.
Because you want your resource recovery loop, especially in a tabletop RPG, to reinforce the things you want the players to be doing.
Right.
So the point is you want your vampires to act like vampires. They gotta suck on people's necks. They gotta neck romance some people. I'm sorry.
No, you're not.
No, I'm not. That's how it's... You have your incentive to continue to use my sick-ass vampire powers, and to do so I have to feed on people because I'm a vampire. So you have this very satisfying loop of encourage player to behave the way they're supposed to, use their cool powers, lather, rinse, repeat.
Right.
And vampire doesn't make it too particularly hard to go find a human to nibble on.
No.
And I understand that you're sort of supposed to be like, oh, I'm a monster, but we all know that all vampire is about playing sexy Draculas.
Yes, absolutely.
And you're right that in the other permutations of that supernatural template, it gets a little... Like, the mage one is especially weird.
Oh,
if I remember right.
Oh, yeah.
Terry is going to come yell at me if I'm wrong, but... we'll have a follow-up episode that's just Terry corrects me about mage. Yeah, so, like, I don't know the mage thing particularly well. I just remember it was weird, and, like, I don't know that it necessarily reinforces the idea of being a wizard. And the Exalted one is just rest.
Kick your feet up.
Kick your feet up, yeah. And I kind of got on this whole thing because I was doing an analysis of Exalted 3rd Edition's moat pool sizes, where there is a specific set, like you respirate 5 moats per round. That's the thing. It's also sort of a mechanic that Essence took and sort of crunched that 5 down into 1. And then I was very frustrated to discover that the moat pool sizes are not tuned specifically so that 5 moats in, 5 moats out.
No. Mm-mm.
They're not at all.
No.
Not even a little.
No.
I just, like, I was doing that and I just turned entirely into that meme picture of Miyazaki with his glasses up on his head, where he's like, God, he has a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. And I'm like, oh, the unenviable task of trying to figure out how much things cost in 3rd edition. And I figured it out. The problem is that, like, the moat pools themselves don't match. And that segues us really nicely into one of the things I feel very strongly about designing resource management, is that if you are going to do that, you absolutely fully need to understand the minimum amount of the resource you can have.
Right.
And the maximum amount of the resource you can have.
Right.
And set those two limits firmly.
Yes.
And ideally, especially for a tabletop RPG, you want those two limits to be a number that people can kind of do math on super easily.
Yes.
2, 4, 6, 8, 10, perfect. 1, 2, 3, perfect. 5, 10, 15, 20, perfect, right? Like, getting weirder than that is going to start putting more overhead on top of it. And then make it a little harder for you as the designer to know where those things are going. So if you're like, okay, 5 of this resource goes in and out every turn, then I know that I have to use units of 5 and maybe half of 5, so 2 and 3, as midpoints, right? Like, so if I know 5 goes in and out, and I want to have an effect that will be recovered, but leave the player, or the character rather, a little in the hole, that's where 2 comes in. That's where 3 comes in, right? So you have, like, these 2 midpoints of, they're going to get 5 of that value back, but 2 of them have to stay out. And so you have a little push-pull.
Right.
Right. And, like, you should be thinking about, and the nice thing about using big numbers like 5, 10, 15, 20 is that you have those midpoints to balance out stuff that you want to be slightly more expensive, right?
Right, yes.
And if the opposite is also true, if you're using really tiny amounts, like 1, 2, and 3, then you have the difficult choice of, like, okay, what 2 effects are worth 1? Like, some things are worth 1 that are not quite as good as other things that are worth 1, right? And then you have to decide where's the difference between 1 and 2, and what is that worth? Which was, a lot of the essence balancing nightmare. And also, if you have a resource management mechanic, especially where you're looking at a push pull of, like, you're going to recover this much in X number of increments. And I'm just using Exalted as an example because I live in that monkey house.
Yeah, right.
You also have to decide what's free.
Yeah, I was about to say that some things should be free when you have really small numbers.
Even when you have bigger numbers, what do you value at free?
Right. And, I think my answer to what should be free are either things that are aesthetically part of the game that the character should just be able to do. You want your free stuff to be things that reinforce your game's most basic premise and make the characters kind of feel, like, useful at all times, even if they don't have their resource. And in Exalted, you almost never don't have your resource, right? Yeah. Because even if you run out of your resource, you just wait a turn and now you've got a little bit of your resource back. Yeah. And running out of your resource is actually very difficult in Exalted.
It's a little easier in Essence than it is in 3, but yes.
Okay. But when you think about what's free, it needs to be, it can't be game-breakingly big stuff, but it needs to be thematic stuff that, yes, this is the thing I want to see over and over and over again because it makes the most sense in the game world and makes the characters feel useful.
Right. Also, like, one of the things that we valued at free a lot in at least the Essence core design are things like double 9s, unless it's coupled with something else. Like, it's just like, I get double 9s to smell good. And you're like, okay, cool, that's free. That's it
Right.
It just modifies your smell good rolls, right? Like,
right.
It's kind of inconsequential. And, like, I think that's the sort of thing that in 3rd edition might cost, like, 1 or 2 votes, which is essentially also free.
When you said smell good, I didn't think, like,
with your sniffer.
Sniff well. I thought, like,
emitted a pleasant aroma.
Yes.
I mean, both of them would be considered free, right?
Yes,
like,
I know.
I mean, that is also a good example.
Double 9s perfumed.
To be perfumed. Right. Well, like, both of them fall into the same category of, like, using your sniffer particularly well, or also emitting a pleasant aroma, are not game-breaking,
No.
unbalancing things. They're sort of things that are fun to add to your character, like playing like a wood aspect who smells pleasantly like flowers 24/7 and then gets to leverage double nines whenever they're like, you want to do what I'm asking you because I smell so good, right? Like, and you know, that also averages out to like what, 1 success per roll or something like that. It's not a fantastic bonus, and you can look at that not just through the lens of Exalted, but through anything else where you have things that are free that like add a tiny bonus, but they're not big rules exceptions. And we could do a whole nother episode on exceptions-based design, and I think maybe we will.
Yeah. That would be fun.
Yeah. So, like, games like Exalted and games like Malifaux are strongly based in rules exceptions, where your cool powers let you break the rules in some way, or ignore a rule in some way. And so, when you are building your resource mechanic on top of a system that is exceptions-based, because not all systems are, Fate isn't, for example, you also then have to decide what exception is worth what.
Right. And sometimes sometimes you can have clear-cut, this specific type of exception costs this much, this specific type of exception costs this much, and how you implement it makes the powers different.
Right.
But sometimes that's just vibes.
Mm-hmm. It kind of shouldn't be, but like you should always sort of know why you are making the exception, and the science of what gets to be made exceptions should be there. The art of when to apply it is the art. That's the vibes, right? You should absolutely know what is good to make exceptions. We're getting way in the weeds on this, but
I know.
But like let's try to keep this to resource management. Like, if you know the bounds of your resources, you should know that they can't go below this minimum and can't go above this maximum. And then if you have a setup where there's likely to be spillover because you're, again, making an Exalted system, or let's say any other system with explosive dice, where you know that there is the possibility that if your resource is randomly generated or tied into a random generation, you could wind up with too much of it. And then you also have to know what to do with the overflow. Right. Because it sucks and it's bad game feel when you have a hard limit on the upper end and then the overflow does nothing.
Yeah.
And you're like, what did I generate all this for?
Right. That's why successes-based roleplay games, and when I say successes-based, like, you need 3 successes to get this effect and 5 successes to get this other effect. A lot of World of Darkness games have that. And sometimes that can be, I got 10 successes. Well, you got your 3.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Let's talk about Fate for a second, since I brought it up.
Yeah.
Because Fate has a resource management mechanic. You have fate points.
They're
very important to the whole thing, right?
Yeah, they really are.
And Fate is not an exceptions-based game.
It is not.
You have very specific things you can do, even with your cool powers. Like, you can have a stunt that gives you a boost, and it is always going to be +2. It's never going to be anything else.
Oh, I think it's a permissions game.
Yes, that's
your powers give you permissions to do additional things, but doesn't break any of the previous rules.
Right. Yeah. The Fate has a bunch of real solid, it's a real solid, light little framework. I'd really love to see Fate get a 2nd edition. 3rd edition, because I guess Fate is technically an updated version of Fudge, but...
Well, I mean, there was Fate Accelerated.
Yeah, Fate Accelerated was just Fate, but trimmed down even further.
Right.
Maybe too far, in my opinion, but I know a lot of people who like it. It's not an unselling point for me.
Sure. Unsold.
Yeah,
Give it back.
Yeah. Just imagine me just throwing a copy of it at Rob Donahue. For the record, I actually know Rob Donahue and we like each other. So this is not. I just want the audience to. This is not a Monty Cook situation.
No. Where Monty Cook is your nemesis and he doesn't know you exist.
He doesn't know I exist. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Right. So yeah. So Fate is kind of all about the narrative permissions, right? So if I am playing, I don't know, a cloud giant, maybe I have a stunt that automatically gives me a boost anytime I leverage being bigger than people.
Right.
Which also, like, might just be an aspect I have.
Sure,
too.
yeah. I'm a big ass cloud giant could be sounds like a fate aspect to me.
It does sure sound like a fate aspect. I like to phrase my fate aspects in fun ways because that, we're authors for the tabletop industry. So my fate aspects are always really fun phrases.
Yes.
So my fate aspect for that would probably be something like bigger and meaner than you.
Right.
Yeah. Like anytime that applies, is spend the fate point. And then you have the cool thing of like you get to invent your trouble, which is the thing that lets you get your points back.
Right.
So it's super fun to look at this as like a resource management game and me talking about like the narrative propping up that whole thing. And so rather than something like Sleepaway, where the game gives you a whole bunch of prompts for the storytelling things that you must do in order to get them back, to put yourself in these specific scary situations,
Sure.
right? Fate goes, you decide the thing that you want to reinforce.
Right. And sometimes that can be a little bit of cognitive load on the player, especially people who are new to Fate, because I've seen people struggle to make good troubles because they're not writers.
Yeah.
And what, like I don't know what about my character I want to reinforce.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
fortunately you can change that too.
You can. Yes. I was essentially thinking like using that kind of mechanic is good. I love Fate. But it can come with a little bit of drawback of the cognitive load that it takes for somebody to come up with that on their own.
Yeah, I agree. And like anytime you have a fill in the blank thing, you run that risk.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's not bad. It's just what it is, right? That is at least a little bit in part why Essence subbed out defining intimacy for Virtue.
Yes.
Because like it is not actually because I think making up a defining intimacy is impossible for new people to do. Absolutely not. People make up that shit all the time.
Oh yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Just slightly easier to pick the thing that defines you off a list than it is to make it up yourself. Slightly. Yeah. Slightly.
It is slightly easier, and anything I mean, I think it is easier, not just slightly, but it is easier because the more fill in the blank that people have to do,
it's faster for sure.
It's faster, right? Some people have a really strong concept at the very beginning of what they want to make, and everything just falls into place. You fill out your defining intimacies because I already have this giant backstory in my head, and like those fill in the blanks are already filled in based on the character I want to play. But some people come to a game, I do this a lot, where I'm like, I'm not sure exactly what I want to play. I'm going to let the game help me decide.
Yeah, I do that too. Sometimes I'm just like, people are like, I'm often sometimes envious of people who roll up with like, I have this whole character ready. I wrote a 30,000 word backstory.
Yeah.
I know everything about them. And I'm like, I don't. So I'm gonna just assign I'm gonna play with the things I think are interesting to play with, and I'll decide who this person is after.
Right, exactly.
And so I think it's also very valuable when games allow you to swap your, like, the things that define your character, especially if those things are resource defining.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like the concept of, speaking of like resource defining, another resource in the World of Darkness games is willpower.
Right.
And there are picks for that help you get that back, which are like your nature, demeanor type things.
Vice and Virtue
yeah. And those again are their picks that you make, and then when you act on them you get willpower back if you and then there's ways to like use them to get all your willpower back. And I actually like that resource management system better than I like the power resource management system.
I was kind of thinking the same thing right then. Go on.
Yeah, because I have a very clear, this is how I act, this is how I am, I can act both ways, these are, I can essentially play into these things to get my resource back, and I kind of choose when to do that and how to do that. versus I act like a vampire and I get my blood back, because that can kind of get a little boring.
Yeah. There's also that, like, how, when you're designing a resource management mechanic, especially for something that's going to prop up an RPG, the question is, how often does it happen?
Right.
And then, how long does that stay interesting?
Right. I don't know, like, I haven't actually gotten a full game of Scion going. I've essentially been played in 2 games where I started at origin level, and then we stopped playing for various reasons.
Yeah. I despite having done a fuck ton of work on Scion, I've played in like 2 games.
Yeah.
This is the same, like, I don't think I've also same with Trinity. Gonna just publicly admit that I've never played Trinity Continuum. Just never got a chance
How
to.
dare!
I would really like to play Assassins. Like, I don't want to run it. I actually would like to just play it.
Yeah,
but
I've run plenty of Trinity, but I haven't actually had a chance for somebody to run it for me. I think I played in an Aeon game.
Okay.
But I have had 0 chance to play any of the other eras. I think that, now we've been talking about this, and this is actually kind of a fun conversation to be having right now, because I am working on an outline for a game, which will probably be announced by the time this airs, that I'm thinking about the resource management for that game and how I want to align, essentially these 2 resources that I've, come up with. One, which is timing, the timing resource, and then the other, which is a spendable resource, and how do you get that back? And this conversation has actually helped me think about, well, how do you get that back?
Right.
And it needs to come back in a cool way. I am, I'm going to hire an author to write that section. But I want to give that person strong direction, right? Like, here's how you're going to get this back. Write it this way.
Yeah.
Right.
And the number 1, determine where your minimum is and your maximum.
Yes.
That's that. Step 1, determine the limits of how much resource you can generate. How low do you want to go? How high do you want to go? Step 2, what do you do with your spillover if you're going to have any?
Right.
Like, Fate doesn't have any.
No.
Belonging Outside Belonging doesn't have any, because they have there's no explosive dice roll to spill it over.
Right.
So, like, if that is not a concern, don't worry about your spillover, because that's not going to happen.
Right. Sometimes it's a concern, sometimes not.
Sometimes it's not, right? Like, also, like, I'm just going to keep referencing Malifaux Through the Breach. You have a maximum hand limit, right? So you start with 6. I think the max is 12. I don't remember, but right. There's minimum is 0. Obviously, you can have an empty hand, and then there's a maximum.
Right.
Can't have negative cards. Not how that works. Also, don't do negative anything in a tabletop RPG.
No.
Don't do negative anything. Stop.
No.
The floor is 0. I don't care how clever you think you are. Don't do it.
Negatives are
bad. Don't do it.
They're if I were making a game that was teaching math, the negatives would be fine.
Yeah, actually.
But because we're not making a game that's teaching math, don't do it, because math isn't hard or anything, and the math for negatives isn't hard. The moment you put a negative in front of a number, people's brains shut off. And it's like the difference between I've had to have this discussion with people. Like, sometimes people will hire me to go over their system and give them critiques, and essentially the reason that Terry calls me the crunch doctor, or the crunch doc. So I've had to tell people, like, you should not make X minus Y your main game mechanic. You should make Y plus X.
Right.
Because it's effectively the same, but you don't want people subtracting. For some reason, addition is easier than subtraction on the fly in people's minds.
I 100% agree. I can go forward just fine. Going backwards makes me churn like a Dreamcast.
Yeah, like there's
dated joke for all the people who are like, what the fuck's a Dreamcast? I've never heard that terrible old console just be like, whenever it tried to read the disc.
I think we still have one.
Oh my god. It was a great little console.
Yeah.
But like, anytime it would load, it made the worst fucking noise.
Yeah. Which is funny because Subtraction isn't any harder than addition.
It's not, no.
It's
just
not,
slower.
But psychologically, it looks more complicated, like, to your lizard brain. When you were first looking at a subtraction, you're like, I gotta do what? And then you can do it, but you don't ever want your players reading your game and going, I gotta do what? Like, that's not an okay reaction. And some people, no problem, right? Some of your readers will have no problem with it. They're not going to react that way. But you don't want any of your readers to react that way.
Right.
You want 0 people to react that way.
You do.
And so addition is just infinitely better. That's my small soapbox for this deep dive.
I mean, I'm on it with you.
Okay.
I'm on it with you. This is sort of related, but generally, favor addition. It's the easiest. If you have to multiply by 2, no more.
Or 5.
2 or 5, because people can do that in their head pretty easy.
Yeah.
If you must divide, half only.
Half only.
And if you have to subtract, keep it very simple.
Yeah, like by -1.
-1, -2. Let's say you're doing a D&D style game where everything is basically static values, so -2 to the check, right?
Sure.
Or if you're doing a dice pool game, -2 dice.
Yeah.
Or if you're doing a PBTA game that is also basically heavily modifier based, -1.
Yeah, -1,
right?
-2.
-1, -2. -2 is pretty fucking brutal in a PBTA game.
It sure is. And yet, all your conditions give you -2.
Yeah, well. Anyway, that is the order in which you should do it.
Right.
Addition first, simple multiplication. The simplest division, half only, and then -1 or -2. Yeah. And this also sort of applies to your resource management mechanics as well.
Yeah.
You have to know the flow of things going in and out. You have to know how this is going to recover, how many things are coming back, and what is the overhead on the person for doing this.
Yeah. The recovery thing is actually interesting to talk about. Let's talk about that for a minute, because if we talk about it in the aspect of the addition only, no multiplication, simple multiplication, very little division, then do X thing, get half your pullback.
Right.
Perfectly fine. Do X thing, get 1 thing back. Perfectly fine. Do X thing, get half your pull, multiply by 3, and add 2. Stop.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Once this starts looking like something from Algebra 2, stop.
Yeah. Stop before it starts looking like that.
If I have to remember the order of operations, if I have to remember the math thing, was it addition? I literally can't remember it right now, so if I have to try to remember that, stop. I kind of got, awakened. The scales fell away from my eyes when I played Weird's game The Other Side for the first time, because it had absolutely fucking outstanding resource management mechanics.
Ooh, tell me about them.
It's been a really long time since I've played it, 3 or 4 years. And then I lost the book. I went to go look for it the other day because I actually wanted to go back and reference some of the really good rules in it. But one of the big things is that it very much understands how many tokens generating tokens on your units is very important. And then you spend them to do stuff, and then to give yourself good conditions and things like that.
Yeah.
And each condition token has a positive side, and then there's things you can force to flip them to give the target the negative side. And if you can flip it back, you get the positive thing back or cancel it out, depending on how many of them you have. Yeah, and it understands how many each unit can generate. It understands how much each thing costs. It understands the regularity with which tokens will flip, and that cleanliness of those interactions is just of course there were things that were a little OP. It was the first release of a game, but that part, the core generation mechanic, beautiful. And sometimes a little bit of Malifaux's design gets carried away with the card generation and how frequently characters can mess with the deck, to the point where occasionally I'm like, do you guys understand how a 54 card deck works? And The Other Side doesn't do that. It's much more calm about that and much more sedate in understanding the scarcity of cards, and then using that tremendously. The cheating mechanic is still the same, but the frequency with which you generate cards, turn your deck, remove things from the deck is much smaller. But it's also less of a push your luck game than Malifaux, so I get it. And also one of the things that both games do is, this is not really a sort of a resource management mechanic, sort of, the suits on the cards give you additional abilities. Like, you have, like, your attack action, and then if it's, like, if you play a card with a matching suit, it gets to do another extra thing, right?
Uh-huh.
Which is actually one of the key inspirations for modes.
Oh, nice.
Do you have anything else you want to touch on?
I guess let's cap with, like, what, recapping what we think makes a good resource management.
Sure. If I haven't beaten this drum enough, it is understanding the flow of your resources. You need to know your minimum, you need to know your maximum, you need to know how many come in, how many come out, how hard it is, and what you're reinforcing.
Right.
Yep.
I think that your resource management needs to be fun
Mm-hmm.
and not feel like a chore.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that when you are doing your resource management, that it doesn't feel outside of the game.
Right.
It should feel like it's a part of what's going on for whatever reason.
Yeah. And I do think that if you have a smooth, well-designed understanding of how your resources go, it will generally be more fun than not. But I think a lot of that, the fun part, is tied up in the reinforcement part. Like, you have to enjoy the part that makes people want to go pursue resources. That should be exciting for people. And that is the art. That's the part that's vibes.
Right. That's the part that you're like,
Yeah, that's the part with no good answer. That you have to figure out on your own. Unfortunately, I can't help you.
No.
The thing that I can tell you to do is to go look at games that you think are good and do that well, and then try to do what they do.
Right.
I completely forgot to do our little ad read, so I'm going to do it right now as we're wrapping up this episode.
Sure.
Hey, we are still part of the Misdirected Mark Network. You can become a BXP patron. Remember that you get to chat with us directly. If you are a patron, you get a special role on our Discord, and sometimes we do exclusive hangouts. When those happen, you get them. You can support us for as little as $1 a month. We love everything that you are willing to give us. Any support matters. If you'd rather support BXP without Patreon, you can subscribe to our coffee. That is ko-fi.com/bonusexp, or you can buy our stuff. We have 2 merch stores. You can go to bxpcast.com/bxpswag, check out our merch page. All the stuff we can get is linked there, and there's also a copy of our affiliate link, so if you want to buy books that Ray and I have worked on, or Dee has worked on, or any of our other rotating door of regular guests have worked on, you can just go grab that, drop it onto the link, and then we get a little kickback. Also, don't forget that BXP is sponsored by Nerdy Kepi. You can get all kinds of rad queer swag. Remember to use code BXPcast at checkout for 10% off, and that never expires. Also, we have exclusive BXP stuff there. You can get a cool, like, black and white shirt that has the BXP logo all over it. I think we have a shirt that just says Margaret with an exclamation point. We have a variety of things with our logo that is styled to look like the LaCroix logo. And all of those are on Nerdy Kepi only, so hey, go get them and support a small business. Saying nice things is also always free. Please leave us a good review on Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Google, Stitcher? I think we're on Stitcher. Spotify. Hey, I don't know where you're listening to this. Wherever you're listening to this, give us a good review. Tell your friends. Help us get more listeners. And if you like Bonus Experience, you will also like Pandas Talking Games. Queer gamers talking about tabletop role-playing games and making outtakes. Join Pandas, Phil, and Senda every Wednesday answering listener questions about playing, running, and designing tabletop RPGs. Get cozy and let's talk about some games. And genuinely, if you like Bonus Experience, you will like Pandas. We have this very similar energy. So I think that about wraps everything up. You can find the show at bxpcast.com, like we just said, part of the Misdirected Mark Network. If you have any questions, you can email them to us at bonusexpcast@gmail.com. We do have a Twitter, it's at bonusexpcast, but I don't think either of us are checking it right now. You can always join us for the discussion on the BXP Discord. We have a little Exalted Quarantine if you're really interested in hanging out with us and talking about Exalted. And I do promise that we talk about other things, but you know, we work on Exalted and people really like it, and that's a big portion of our audience, so just go in knowing that if you're joining the BXP Discord, we talk about Exalted a lot. You can find that at tinyurl.com/BXP Discord. Dee, where can they find you if they want to get more D action? That's terrible. I should not have said that.
That's woo. I am also in the BXP Discord. I rarely read it, but sometimes I do pop in there to make witty comments. You can also find me at daniellozon.com, the website that I barely update. And otherwise, don't perceive me.
Okay. Cool. You can follow me. I'm still on Twitter. Though at this point, I've given up the pretense of like talking about tabletop stuff on Twitter at all. I've started to just like horny things on main, so follow it. I'm at Zenith Sun, and I like one of my friends' porn a lot, so just be forewarned. But if you actually want to hear me talk about tabletop stuff, I much prefer to do that on Tumblr because I can like write outposts and not get dogpiled by people taking everything in bad faith. And I am Dice-Wizard on Tumblr. Please follow me. The only people who are following me right now are porn bots. I think that's it. All right. Everybody get out.
Get out.
Yeah, it's lunchtime. It's kind of late for me. I gotta go to the bathroom.
Let's go.
All right. Remember, change it if you want to.
Do I have to do this? Ugh, fine. Bonus Experience is written by Monica, and edited by Margaret. Our logo and art is by Nino Studios. Find her on Facebook and Instagram. Our theme song is Reuse Noise with the Light by CDK, and is used under the Attribution Non-Commercial Creative Commons license. BXP is part of the Misdirected Mark Network. Okay, there, I read it. Now bye!